Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hello, and welcome to episode 85 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another story. Before we jump into today's case, a few quick reminders. First off, the hidden files, the bonus content from TheKillFile, are on Patreon or Spotify for just $3 a month. You will get 2 bonus episodes, which are all circling and including true crime, but they are slightly different than our regular Monday episodes. Some of the episodes have or will include the Stonewall Uprising, the Great Molasses Flood, and even the story of the Uruguayan Flight 571 that crashed into the Andes with a full rugby team aboard. These are just a few of the episodes that we have, so if you're interested in getting more content from me, then I would say join us. Next, don't forget to check out the website, TheKillFile.com, where you can find the form for listener files, which will hopefully be an episode on the bonus content, The Hidden Files, where I will compile some of your own true crime stories or hometown murders into episodes. You can fill out the form or you can email your story to TheKillFilePodcast@gmail.com. While you're on the website, you can also check out our merch shop, where you'll find great true crime gear like cozy sweatshirts or hoodies, or even t-shirts for the upcoming spring. Not only are some of the slogans funny and awesome, but it will also help to support the podcast, and I will always bring those designs in at the cheapest that it will let me because I am so thankful for all of you and would love to see people wearing all the TheKillFile stuff out there in the wild one day. Lastly, if you haven't yet, please follow us on our social media platforms. We are on TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook, as well as my more personal page. If you are curious about my own life, you can follow that on Facebook as well. And if you can, please share a post or 2 on your own page or tell a friend about your favorite true crime podcast or the bonus content. Help us grow and get more and more listeners so I can one day put out more content for you guys and continue the fun. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today, we are going to be talking about a serial killer named Bela Kiss, aka the monster or the vampire of Cincota. Trigger warnings for today are going to be rape and murder. Let's jump in. Today's story is going to take us all the way over to a place called Cincota, Hungary, which I had to make sure that I was saying it correctly because I have heard anything from Hungary to Hungary, and after much research, I have learned that it's simply Hungary. Our story takes place in the early 1900s, where at the time Cincota was just a village outside of Budapest, where now I have learned it's currently a neighborhood inside of Budapest. According to an AI overview of the area in this time frame, Cincota was considered to be a restful small town on the outskirts of the busy, or what could be considered chaotic for the early 1900s, Budapest. The area relied heavily on their rural industries and were made up of blue-collar work people like day laborers, tradespeople, farmers, or craftsmen. Since the area was small, if people came from other places, and since this was the early 1900s and people were bored, it was a big deal when someone new arrived and they were immediately noticed. People would socialize at the local hotel, but other than that, there wasn't a whole lot going on until the vampire of Cincota made his appearance. Let's learn a little bit more about Mr. Bela Kiss. Kiss was born in the year of 1877 in a place called Isaac, Austria, Hungary. There isn't really much known about Kiss's background or childhood. Despite the search, no one seems to really know anything about him growing up. And I have a feeling that that's for a reason that we will discuss later. Things sort of start to come out about Kiss when he was in his early 20s. Kiss was described as a handsome man with blonde hair and blue eyes. One source would say that Kiss had been married twice and also had 2 children. At the time of 23 years old, he was married to a young woman named Marie. And when they first made it into the town where they would rent a house in Cincota, people took notice because of the town's small nature. While Marie and Kiss were renting said house on the outskirts of the small town, Kiss was a tinsmith. Kiss was noted to have not had any formal training in what he did, and he had taught himself how to smith tin. Besides his self-taught career, people were alleged to have been impressed with Kiss's vast knowledge in other areas as well, including history, astronomy, art, and even literature. People in his town considered Kiss to be a highly educated man and was someone known for his generosity. Kiss and his beautiful wife Marie were hosts to some amazing parties they threw at the local hotel. Although appearances seemingly showed that Marie and Kish were happily married, there would be rumors starting to swirl, and the town gossip would often feature the couple. I guess one thing that was known about Kish was the fact that he was sort of a jealous man. His wife was beautiful, and he knew it. One source would say that Kish had actually forbade his wife from having any men as friends. Just the thought of a man forbidding his wife from doing anything is just such an old-fashioned train of thought. Kish often had to travel for his job or for whatever reasons, and while he was away, I guess Marie was rumored to have started having an affair with a local artist named Paul Beccari. On Christmas Eve in 1912, Kish would be crushed when he would admit to the townspeople that his wife Marie had left a note and ran off with her lover. And just like that, Kish went from a jealous husband to a handsome, single man that women would now pine after. So after Marie had left Kish, he needed a housekeeper to help him around his home, and this is when he would hire a Miss Yucabek to be his housekeeper. Remember, there were times that Kish wouldn't be home because of his job, so someone needed to help him look after his home not only while he was gone, but also just around the house and whatnot, as I'm sure his schedule was busy. But while she was to help him with his home, it was reported that there was one room that the housekeeper was forbidden to enter. I'm sorry, but if my employer, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, whoever it was like, don't ever go in the basement, or hey, you're not allowed to ever enter this room, the minute that I was away from this person, my ass would immediately be breaking into that room. I have to know why someone would not want me in there. And I have to know the person that I'm with or working for. There's no way in hell that I would stay out of that room, any room, ever. I would immediately think that that person was doing nefarious deeds. Many of the neighbors around the area where Kish lived seemed to like him all right, although they would admit that they didn't know him all that well, but he seemingly was, I guess, nice enough. Miss Jakobek had started to notice after a while that Kish was corresponding with many young women, and he was doing most of this through advertisements that he was placing in newspapers. Around this same time, Kish had been collecting numerous large metal drums at his home as well. And when I guess the police had at some point asked him, what are these for? He told them that with the upcoming war that was inevitable, and that would be World War I, he was collecting gasoline for himself and because he knew he could sell it at a high profit because it was most likely going to be rationed after the war began. This must have made sense to them because I don't think that he was questioned about it again. Now, while Kish was corresponding with these women, he had also been offering his services, I guess, as either a fortune teller, which surprised me, or something called a matrimonial agent. I had to look up, what the hell is a matrimonial agent, and not just that, but was it different back in the early 1900s in Hungary? Turns out these agents were kind of matchmakers, but slightly misogynistic in nature. Most of the time, these roles were usually women who did this, but according to an AI overview, these people would help to quote-unquote recommend women and help facilitate marriages between two families. So, if a culture was usually based on arranged marriages, then this person would be the in-between who would help match families or people who, instead of relying on love to find the person that they would end up with, they would help them keeping in mind maybe their social economic status or even how much land they owned. So maybe if a man had gone in saying he was looking for a wife and this was his place in society and this is what he owned, etc., the matchmaker or agent would recommend this woman or that based on what her family owned or how much money they had. Romantic, huh? Also, I would love to know about Kish's fortune-telling abilities. It was seen that many of these women would come over for these various services. Around this time, not long before the war would indeed start, women in the area had started to disappear, and there were also rumored to be women who had been attacked or had some seriously strange stories to tell. For example, a woman named Louisa Roots, sorry if I butchered that, had said that she had been attacked by a wild-eyed monster with fangs as she was walking alone one night, and when she woke up in the park, she said her jewelry and her purse were gone. Another source would say that Louisa had actually met Kish and had a strange encounter with him as he promised to tell her fortune at his home. Then she woke up in the park with all of her jewelry and purse gone. In Budapest, a place where Kish was thought to have also quote-unquote hunted for victims, there were two women who happened to be widows who had both vanished, one with the last name of Schmiediak and the other Varga. Both of the widows had been seen at one time or another with a younger man whose name was Hoffman. There was another victim who had lived, was married, and was a woman who claimed that she had almost been hit by a taxi when a man had saved her. After he did, he introduced himself as a jeweler named Franz Hoffman. As the two shared a common interest in fine jewelry and such, this Hoffman guy invited her back to his place where they shared a drink, and then the man tried to strangle her. The woman again woke up in a public space where officers of the law were all around her, and again, her jewelry was missing. So some sources had stated that Kish had also rented an apartment or a flat in Budapest while he was hunting for victims because this is where he had taken out those advertisements, and this way he wouldn't have to get them all the way back to his house each and every time. So it could be possible that the women that he was taking back to his flat were the ones who weren't really killed, just strangled into unconsciousness and robbed, and maybe the women who made it back to his actual home were the ones who were never seen again. That's just my conjecture, though. As women were coming in with these strange encounters with this Hoffman guy and being victims of robbery and strangulation, the constable, or an officer of the law, was forced to pay Kish a visit. Kish was clever, though, and he told the officer that this Hoffman guy had rented an apartment in the city and that he was the one telling people to look for Kish. When the police went to Hoffman's apartment, he was already gone, meaning it was Kish and he was not dumb. Remember, this was the early 1900s, so there wasn't even like an inkling of technology or anything that could help point to Kish lying, as he was seemingly a good guy and a generous guy. So I guess the police believed his bullshit. In 1914, Bela Kiss would be drafted into the military and would be sent off to fight in World War I. Some sources would claim that before he left, he put iron bars on his home to keep anyone out. However, he did ask Mrs. Jakobek to keep watch over his home while he would be away at war. Now, remember, he was renting this house, so why he was allowed to put bars over his windows, I will never know, but alright. There were a few different versions of what exactly happened next, but the main point of the versions are all the same. A discovery would be made that rocked the small village of Cinkota and the city of Budapest. One version of the story is that Kish's landlord had been informed that it was very likely that Kish had died, while it was reported that a year and a half into the war, Kish had sent his neighbor a letter, to which the neighbor was happy about, and when he sent a return letter, it was sent back to him with a note that Kish had died in a hospital that was located by Belgrade. Another source would say that the townspeople had found out Kish had died because his actual name was located on a war memorial of fallen soldiers. So as sad as that might be, the landlord would need to prepare the property for another tenant. Another version would say that either a friend of Kish, or again the landlord, one of them was trying to help out some soldiers who were in need and knew that Kish had saved all of those drums of gasoline, and he had led the men to the drums. Either way of exactly how it happened, the landlord would end up poking a hole in one of the drums, I'm assuming to siphon out the gas or somehow get it. But instead, the men would be slapped in the face with a putrid smell. Not only was it seen that the barrels were instead filled with wood alcohol, but they would immediately know that this was not just wood alcohol in these 7 barrels. The landlord then immediately called the detective chief of Budapest police, a Dr. Charles Nagy, reporting he believed that there had been a murder on his property. Nagy brought along 2 of his best detectives as they headed over to the landlord's property. When they looked inside of the barrels, it was reported that there was a large sack, and in that sack was the full, naked body of a woman with long, brown hair who had been strangled to death. The wood alcohol, I guess, had pretty well preserved these bodies. In fact, you will see a lot that Kish, by using the wood alcohol, basically pickled the dead bodies. As you may have guessed, the other 7 barrels also contained remains of dead women. As the authorities searched the property, they would indeed find 24 bodies in total. All of them had been women except for one man, who we will get to in a sec. After the horrific discovery of the bodies were made, Dr. Nagy would immediately call the military, informing them of what they now knew, and, of course, that the military should apprehend him as quickly as possible. The problem was that not only was Kish's name, I guess, pretty common, but also the military had no idea if this man was even still alive. So I guess it was possible the name on the military remembrance plaque that the townspeople had seen could have been a different Bela Kiss. Now, a huge manhunt was on to find this sick bastard. One source would say that Dr. Nagy actually notified telegraph and postal services around the area that any letters or messages that were intended for Kish needed to be held aside because Dr. Nagy thought that Kish may have actually had an accomplice. 24 bodies for one man in all of these barrels? It is a lot. The authorities then went after his housekeeper, Miss Jakobek, who insisted that she was innocent and had no idea what was going on. In fact, she would lead them to a room that was always closed off to her, and where she would always be told not to enter. They did not find any more barrels of bodies, as I had thought for sure they would, but instead they found a simple room with a desk, a chair, and some bookcases. It was what was on the bookcases and in the desk that would help us to understand why his housekeeper was not allowed to enter the room. On the bookshelves, the authorities would find books pertaining to strangulation as well as poisons, which I found interesting that they had these books way back then about strangulation. It had to have been more of like a scientific textbook, right? I mean, there's no way that back then they had the dark literature that we have now. There was no book of art on strangulation, I'm guessing. Along with the books, they would find some interesting tidbits inside of the desk. Not only had they found a will that left everything to his housekeeper, which may have made her look even more suspicious, because some sources had said that she was actually protesting that anyone should open those barrels, but everyone had wondered how she would not have known what was going on. According to crimelibrary.org, when Dr. Nagy was at the house making the finding of all of it, Miss Jakubek would say to him, quote, "Please, sir, I know nothing of this terrible thing. I knew Bela Kiss only as a man who was kind to me and paid me well." End quote. They would also find some letters inside of Kish's desk that were correspondences between himself and numerous women dating all the way back to 1903. In total, I believe that it was said that they found 74 letters, in which many of the women were responding to one of Kish's ads and clearly wanted marriage. In fact, there were said to be about 174 different marriage proposals. It was clear to the investigators that Kish was defrauding these women with promises of marriage if they would send him money or whatever. There were also over 100 pictures of women with many of the letters as well. Dr. Nagy started to wonder and worry that there could actually be even more victims than were found at his house, and also wondered how a man like Kish could rob these women of just so much money, some of them even their entire savings, without anyone having noticed. Part of the reason that no one would really realize what had been going on was because Kish was not stupid. He would usually target women who maybe didn't have family close by so that they wouldn't be noticed as missing very quickly. Sources said this is when Dr. Nagy started wondering if maybe the housekeeper had been involved after all. This is when Mrs. Jakubek supposedly yelled at Dr. Nagy not to arrest her and that she was quote-unquote a simple old woman. She explained that yes, she had been looking after the property for many years now, but that everyone, including her, thought that Kish was just a kind younger man that everyone seemed to adore, and they all thought that he would never be capable of hurting anyone. She would tell a story that there had once been a dog that was injured, and Kish had made some splints for the dog himself and nursed the dog back to health. Miss Jakubek also seemed to be convinced that there was some kind of mistake here. She insisted that someone else had to have been the murderer. She was clearly in denial, which I can kind of understand. Your initial reaction is probably not to believe that you yourself have been deceived this entire time that you've known this young person, who you sort of looked after as well, for so long, and it would be really hard to realize that he was a monster. I can imagine that that's something that would need to sit and stew for a while. As far as the victims went, while the authorities were inside the home searching for evidence, they would find a few key pieces of importance. For example, one piece of clothing had been found to have the initials KV on it, and then on a handkerchief they had seen faint letterings of MT. The authorities were able to trace the KV initials back to a woman named Catherine Varga, who was said to be a woman living in Budapest who had some wealth and owned a business where she was a dressmaker, who sadly sold the business before she left to be with Kish. That's so fucking heartbreaking that a woman at this time had some wealth and is kicking ass in the business world, and she loses it all and her own life for some asshole who is killing women and taking advantage of them financially. When some clothing was found in the Kish house that had the name Julian Pashak stitched on it, the authorities were able to dig around and find out this woman's story. First, though, I have to say, would these authorities have been fucked if these women didn't have their names on all of their clothes? And also, why do they have their names on everything? I can only imagine that it's just because maybe clothes were not cheap back then, and if they got lost or stolen, they wanted their items back. But the police were very lucky that everything was labeled. So Julianne's story would turn out to be slightly different than some of the other women, in that she, along with another woman named Elizabeth Kamarami, had both sued Kish for his scams of taking their money and promising marriage but not following through. The suits were basically dropped, though, after each woman's court date came up, but the women didn't show, and they were unable to be located. Which is crazy to me that they didn't immediately look at Kish if the woman couldn't be found. I mean, it's one thing to not show up to a court date and then the case is dropped, but if they couldn't be found, someone should have definitely taken a look at the person that each of these women were suing. That's nuts. The victims inside the barrels were allegedly rumored to have had puncture marks on each of their necks, and their blood had been drained from their bodies. I guess that could be where the nickname vampire came from. Many people believed the victims were drained because it would help preserve the bodies inside the barrels. Of course, other rumors would circle around the fact that this man was indeed a vampire. The puncture marks, in my mind, could have definitely been from like a syringe where maybe he used a concoction of those poisons from the books to maybe knock him out. A newspaper article would actually say the women had been found with thin ropes or cords around their necks, and each had a handkerchief shoved in their mouth as well, although I didn't see this anywhere else, so who knows. Eventually, Dr. Nagy was allegedly able to figure out through evidence that Kish had murdered around 30 women, with only a handful being able to be identified at first. One day, during the case, 2 women had sought out Dr. Nagy with some information. These women being Mrs. Stephen Toth and her daughter-in-law. The women told Dr. Nagy that Mrs. Toth's daughter, named Margaret, who I guess had gone to work in Budapest. While her mother was visiting her daughter at one point, Margaret had introduced her mother to Mr. Kish, who had then somehow convinced Mrs. Toth to give him some money and gave her a promise that he was going to indeed marry Margaret. However, not long after, Margaret accused Kish of going back on his promise of marriage, and I'm sure this pissed off her mother. When Mrs. Toth went to go confront Kish about his promise to marry her daughter, Kish had convinced Mrs. Toth that he was not going back on his promise. No, he just needed to postpone the marriage a little bit, that's all. Then he explained that Margaret had gotten very upset with him and decided to leave for America. However, Dr. Nagy now knew that this was probably not the case, and according to crimelibrary.org, Dr. Nagy thought he had figured out what really happened. He believed in 1906, when Kish had over Margaret to his house, that Kish had probably forced Margaret to write a letter to her family, saying that the rejection she felt by Kish and the shame was just more than she could bear, so she was running away to America to find someone else. Dr. Nagy then believed, after the letter was written, that Kish strangled Margaret and stuffed her into a barrel, and then sent the letter to Mrs. Toth. Out of all of the women found on the property, there would be only 14 of them identified from either their clothing or jewelry or whatever found with or on them. However, 2 of the victims would indeed turn out to be his wife, Marie, who had allegedly run away with her lover, and the only man found on the property was indeed her lover, Paul Beccari. While the authorities were, of course, searching for Kish, they were unable to locate him. However, there would be a few odd alleged sightings of him. The first came in 1916 on October 4th, when Dr. Nagy would receive a message from a hospital in Siberia saying that they had a soldier by the name of Bela Kiss, and they believed that he could be the man that Dr. Nagy had been searching for. When Dr. Nagy finally got to the hospital, it was later that evening, and when they got to the ward that a Mr. Kish was recuperating in, they found instead the body of a dead soldier. This man was no Bela Kish, leading the authorities to believe that Kish may have caught wind of what was going on and fled, but left the body of a dead soldier in the bed instead. This was in many sources, so I'm not saying that it's untrue, but I just had so many questions, like did the people who had been treating the man they believed to be Kish confirm that the man that was dead in the bed was not the same man that they had been treating? And that it wasn't just this man had died before Dr. Nagy could get there? Because remember, Dr. Nagy, along with others, had been notified at some point that Kish had already died, and I believe at one point Dr. Nagy was notified that Kish had died from typhoid in 1915. But again, if so many people had the same name, it's impossible to know which one of these men was the monster they were looking for. There were other reported sightings as well as tips coming in after Dr. Nagy had been to the hospital where the dead soldier was. He believed that Kish was alive, and he reported that everywhere so people could be on the lookout for him. One person claimed to have seen Kish walking down the street in Budapest in 1919. Another person, who was said to be somewhat suspicious themselves, but a part of the French Foreign Legion, which is basically like their military, he claimed that another legionnaire could in fact be Kish. This man, who was in the Legion, gave the name Hoffman, which we all know that Kish had used as an alias at one point. The same man allegedly bragged that he was someone who was very good with a garrote. A garrote, for anyone who isn't familiar with the term, is just something that a person would use to strangle another human being besides their hand, so like a cord or a wire or something. When the authorities showed up based on the tip wanting to question this guy, it was figured out that the man had fled or deserted the military without so much as a word. However, I was able to find in a newspaper from October 20th, 1929, the paper called the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, in a huge article about Kish, that the man who reported Kish being in the Legion had said that he saw Kish die at the hands of the enemy. Another sighting came from a soldier in Hungary who claimed that Bela Kiss had actually been in prison in Romania for what he said was burglary, and yet another soldier said that Kish had actually died in Turkey with yellow fever. I had to look up what yellow fever was out of curiosity. I guess it's transmitted by mosquitoes and is what AI said was an acute viral hemorrhagic, I don't know if I'm saying that word right, disease, and can potentially be fatal. Hemorrhagic diseases being diseases with fevers that are often fatal, like Ebola, which can cause you to hemorrhage inside. Doesn't sound great. Another sighting would come in New York when a detective by the name of Henry Oswald was absolutely convinced that he had seen Kish walking around in Times Square near a subway station, and this would be in 1932. You see, Detective Oswald was uniquely known for his ability to remember faces, so this had some substance to it. And after the report, people believed that Kish was definitely living in New York, and now in his late 60s. I kept wondering, besides maybe that last one, how could people be so sure these sightings were Kish? Like, all I could find as far as a picture was a drawing of him during wartime while he was in the military. So how the hell did all of these people think that they saw this one single man? How could they be so sure? One thing is for sure, while Bela Kiss is definitely dead by now, his story remains elusive and no one ever, for sure, saw the man known as Bela Kiss again. And that, my friends, is the story of Bela Kiss, the monster or vampire of Cincota. This story is one of those cases that, again, a seemingly normal guy is a complete deviant instead. But I have a few questions about this guy. First off, how the hell do we know that his actual name was Bela Kiss in the first place? This guy was married twice, allegedly, and had children, right? Where did those kids go? Did anyone ever track down his first wife and ask why they got divorced or how he was as a husband? His victims and murderers suggested that this was well thought out, planned, and had come on the heels of theft or robbery of unsuspecting women. How do we know that he hadn't been doing this for even longer at an older home or place of residence? It's completely possible. My next question is, how do we know this man actually went off to war? Couldn't he have just said that he was drafted and really he just took off? I mean, they did find 28 barrels, that's a lot. Even the military couldn't find this man among their ranks, and just because the neighbor got a letter and then his was returned doesn't necessarily mean that he was in war. And it could have been him who returned the letter and added a note that he was now deceased. He could have totally sent his neighbor a letter just to feel out the situation back home to see if anyone was looking for him, and then he was smart and sent that he died so no one would come looking for him. Also, whether he went into the military or not, he could have been using an alias after he fled from Cincota. The research and thoughts from the authorities was that this was so well planned out and inconspicuous that he had most likely done it before, and that means that he probably kept doing it. I wonder if he truly had come to America or any other country, if he could have been like a serial killer here, and no one connected the dots if he was caught, or maybe he just wasn't caught. It's such a mystery. Can you imagine being that landlord finding women in a barrel? And because it was so long ago, we don't even know what all he did with them first before he killed them, right? Although it was alleged in numerous reports that he did rape them. It's just an insane story of this man living among his townsfolk like a generous young man, and bam, they figure out the whole time that he was scheming and luring women and killing them. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about this crazy case as much as I did, and remember, you do not have to, nor should you, pay someone in hopes of marriage. Come on back next Monday when we will cover another case here on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help the podcast grow and other true crime lovers to find us. Also, check out the website, TheKillFile.com, where you can suggest a case, find our merch shop, and submit a listener file. Follow The Kill File on your favorite social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. Of course, you can always subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.